Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Trumbore with your nightly review for Monday, March 11. Little Chaka-Khan. Chaka-Khan. It is 4:02 p.m. Eastern Time. Dow Jones hit another all-time high, up 49 to 14,440, actually up 50. 50 to 14,447. S&P gained 5 to 1556, so it's 9 points shy of its all-time high. And NASDAQ was up 8 to 3252. All three were up 0.3%. Tokyo finished up another 0.5% to 12,349. I keep thinking back to the economics minister there who in February said the Nikkei would be 13,000 by April 1st. And again, just picture our Treasury Secretary making a statement like that. Man, China was down a bit. London, Paris, and Frankfurt essentially unchanged. Oil 91.83, and I forgot to get the gold price, but I believe it was around 15.76. And the 10-year Treasury at 2.06. In France, industrial production for January was down 1.2% over December, far worse than expected. Factory output was down 1.4% for January, down 4.6% in France for the 3 months through January. So they are very much mired in recession. In China, all kinds of numbers over the weekend. It's the weakest start to a year since 2009 in terms of industrial production. You have to combine January and February because the week-long Lunar New Year holiday falls during that period. And so for the 2 months, industrial production was up 9.9% when it was estimated to be up 10.6%. Retail sales were up 12.3%. The estimate had been 13.8%, and again that's for January and February combining the two. The Lunar New Year holiday was in January last year, it was in February this year. And the Consumer Price Index was up 3.2% in February, a little hotter than expected. The government has set a target of 3.5% for the year. Exports were the lone source of good news, up 23.6%, better than expected. Okay, this is the week the Republicans and Democrats are to unveil details of their budget proposals. Paul Ryan's new plan for the Republicans gives states more authority over Medicaid as part of a plan to scrap Obamacare, which is, of course, a no-go with Democrats. Speaking about Obama's recent outreach program, Paul Ryan said, quote, "The proof will be in the coming weeks as to whether or not it is a real, sincere outreach to find common ground." Now, Ryan's plan wipes out the deficit in 10 years, not 20, as was his proposal last year. But with the January tax hike on the wealthy and sequestration, it's more doable, argue Republicans. Ryan's budget calculus includes a $770 billion cut to Medicaid over the next 10 years. Under Obama's health care plan, Medicaid would expand rather than contract, bringing in about 20 million more users. Asked whether his plan was realistic, Ryan said, "Will the president take our premium support program and block granting Medicaid? My guess is he won't. We think that's the best way to make these programs work better. But are there things you can do short of that, that gets you closer to balancing the budget, that delays the debt crisis from hitting this country? Yes, I think there are. So that's Paul Ryan. An editorial in the Wall Street Journal. The appearance of a new bipartisanship is perfectly consistent with such a partisan 2014 strategy. The more reasonable he appears today, the better positioned Obama might be to blame Republicans for failure next year. Independent voters will have to see politicians working together, however haplessly. So Mr. Obama may figure he has nothing to lose by dropping his Democrats-only strategy for now. He can always sandbag the GOP again later. In particular, he'd love to carve out deals in the Senate that isolate House Republicans. Our advice to the GOP opposition in the meantime is adapting the Reagan arms control maxim, don't trust but verify. Mr. Obama has repeatedly demonstrated that he can't be trusted in backroom negotiations where he can later claim to support something he really didn't. Republicans need to test his seriousness in the sunlight where voters can better see who is the real obstructionist. One topic I'm really concerned about is talk of the deficit coming down, and I'll tell you why. This is a Paul Krugman's New York Times column today. Dwindling deficit disorder. For 3 years and more, policy debate in Washington has been dominated by warnings about the dangers of budget deficits. What's really remarkable at this point, however, is the persistence of the deficit fixation in the face of rapidly changing facts. People still talk as if the deficit were exploding, as if the United States budget were on an unsustainable path. In fact, the deficit is falling more rapidly than it has for generations. It is already down to sustainable levels, and it is too small given the state of the economy. Of course, it's a typical Krugman argument. But yes, the deficit is coming down. Recall about a month ago when I had all the Congressional Budget Office calculations for the next 10 years and longer. And you're going to hear a lot about this over the coming months. It's true. This year, based on CBO projections, the deficit for fiscal 2013, which that year ends September 30, is going to be $845 billion, which is less than the $1 trillion plus deficits we were running the previous 4 years. And I outlined in one of my displays how in 2015, 2 years hence, fiscal 2015, the deficit is slated to come down to $430 billion. Well, that is a big improvement. But I also showed you how because of entitlement spending in the out years, how the CBO projects in 2022 that the deficit goes from a low of $430 billion back to $957 billion, and I showed you how net interest expense rises from $225 billion this year, fiscal 2013, to $800 billion net interest in 2022. Which is, the whole point is, this is why we have to tackle entitlement spending, but you're going to see a ton of arguments and op-ed pieces and the Democrats saying the deficit's coming down, and it's true, it will come down. And the CBO's numbers are based on 3.4% GDP growth by the fourth quarter of 2014, and then 3.6% GDP growth 2015 through 2018, and then it comes back down due to the entitlement crush. But so that's a deficit of $957 billion in 2022, and of course these things change significantly, but everybody's got to use the same facts, and these are the facts. 957 billion projected 2022, even with very substantial growth. So I point that out to you. And another pet peeve of mine, valuation. So here we have January 2000, October 2007, March today, 2013, Dow Jones price earnings multiple, S&P 500 price earnings multiple. So let me just show you how careless some people are. In Barron's this week, in their market column, I won't give the author's name, he says the S&P 500 was at 1469 this past January, the same level where it began this century, yet earnings and dividends have doubled in the 13 years since, slashing the market's valuation from 30 to 14.7 times what companies earned in the preceding 12 months. It's just careless. I didn't plan this real well, guys. No, we'll hold it there. The whole point is that everybody talks about price-earnings ratios, and they never tell you what is their metric. These are trailing numbers, trailing figures. This is the price-earnings multiple today. 15.8 on the Dow, 18 on the S&P 500. I showed you how I've been tracking since 1990. Price earnings multiples, all kinds of things. So when the market hit its high in January of 2000, that was a Friday, January 14th, and the Dow was at 11,722, which was an all-time high then. The price earnings multiple was 25 for the Dow and 33.3 for the S&P 500. And all you hear, especially on CNBC, is somebody talking about the S&P, about the price earnings multiple being in the neighborhood of 14 or 15 today, or even 13. Well, it's 18. I'm not saying the market is grossly overvalued or undervalued, but it's got to be apples to apples when you talk price earnings. And the only one I've seen in a piece today in the Washington Post who calls it right, and he's coincidentally my favorite economist, is Robert Samuelson, who says, quote, the market's current PE is 17.6, and that's because when he was writing this he didn't have access to Barron's Market Lab column for this week, so he was writing off of last week's figures, and they were exactly 17.6. So good job, Robert Samuelson. So when you hear somebody say the price earnings multiple is 14 or 13, you can only use trailing numbers, and at least let the people you're addressing know that you think because S&P earnings are going to grow 5 or 10%, that yes, the forward PE is 14 or 13. All right, sorry, get off on that, and apologize for not being more organized. In North and South Korea, South Korea and the U.S. began annual military drills Monday, and South Korean officials say their northern counterparts didn't answer 2 calls on the hotline between the two. Remember, we have 28,000 American troops there. Kim Jong-un is quite a pistol. In Venezuela, the election has been set for April 14, a little over the 30 days that's mandated by the Constitution. Enrique Capriles, who opposed Chavez in October and lost by 11 points, announced he will run again. Acting President Nicolas Maduro, Chavez handpicked successor. should win handily. In the aftermath of Chavez's death, you can imagine the people will want to fulfill his wishes in voting for Maduro. For political junkies, I thought Jack Chang and Eduardo Castillo had an interesting point in the Associated Press. They said a defeat for Capriles just 6 months after he lost the vote to Chavez would likely finish his political career. He's only 40, but that would be 2 losses in 6 months. If he waits, a Chavista government might prove inept and give him a better shot in a later election. So, for you Venezuelan political junkies out there, that is a very good point. In Afghanistan, Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel was rudely greeted on his first trip to the country. 2 suicide bombings in Kabul and Eastern Coast province killed 19, including 8 children. Earlier, a U.S. contractor was killed when attackers thought to be Afghan soldiers stormed their base. Then today, 2 U.S. soldiers were killed in an insider attack. A number of Afghan soldiers were also killed at a base in Wardak province near Kabul. U.S. military called the attack a, quote, betrayal, and the killer, a member of the Afghan security forces, was shot dead at the scene. But Wardak is where President Karzai wants U.S. Special Ops forces withdrawn over his allegations they were involved in torture and killings, which is totally unfounded. And Karzai, on Sunday, accused the Taliban and the U.S. of working in concert to convince Afghans that violence will worsen if most foreign troops leave. This is what Karzai said. The explosions in Kabul and coast yesterday showed that they are the service of America and at the service of this phrase 2014. They are trying to frighten us into thinking that if the foreigners are not in Afghanistan, we would be facing these sorts of incidents. That's Karzai. U.S. NATO, our friend. U.S. NATO Forces Commander General Joseph Dunford said Karzai had never expressed such views to him. We have fought too hard over the past 12 years. We have shed too much blood over the last 12 years to ever think that violence or instability would be to our advantage. New York Times had a big piece titled, "In Parts of Syria, Lack of Assistance is a Catastrophe." But the reporter says the United Nations agencies are the main conduit for international aid, including most of the total of $385 million that Washington has directed to the cause in 2012 and 2013. Remember, I've been saying that's just a lie. Saeed Bakr Yahya, a director of a clinic near Aleppo, said, "The lack of foreign aid is a catastrophe. We get nothing." But then the Times goes, "The United States has done more than any other country to circumvent the UN, but its efforts remain unknown to most Syrians." And then this reporter just quotes a U.S. diplomat who says, "Our humanitarian assistance, $385 million to date, is making a difference." But that's not true. That's just not factually true. The UN said just last week they have received, out of total pledges worldwide of $1.5 billion, only $300 million. But our reporters let the administration line that they have kicked in $385 million plus another $60 million in non-lethal assistance that Secretary of State Kerry just talked about last week, as if this is fact. It's not. In Egypt, what a freaking mess. The IMF expressed reservations over Egypt's economic plan and is not ready to grant the country a $4.8 billion loan, which they desperately need. Unrest in many parts of the country, Cairo, Port Said, resulting from the deadly February 2012 soccer riots that killed 74, and court rulings this weekend upholding the death sentences of 21 fans of one club, while acquitting 7 of 9 police officers on trial for their role. 70 protesters have been killed since November off of protests because of this whole soccer riot trial. The election committee scrapped President Morsi's election timetable for Parliament. Growing concern over the terror threat in Sinai with its tourist resorts. The police are striking. All of society is against us. It considers the demonstrators killed in clashes to be martyrs, and we don't even have the right to defend ourselves. That was the police colonel. And finally, Chinese officials have found a total of 3,323 dead pigs in a Shanghai river as of Monday afternoon. The city's water authority said water quality remained normal, which, having been to China a bunch of times, that's not good. Normal is not good in China, sports fans. CCTV reported local residents near Huangpu River said that dead, deceased pigs, dumping them in the river was common practice. It's reported up to 10,000 pigs have been dumped in the river flowing down towards Shanghai. Unreal. I'll be back with you on Tuesday. Take care.